Hi, welcome to the BERDO Review Board public hearing. My name is Diana Vasquez. I'm the BERDO Review Board manager. I will be leading us in a vote for acting chair. Is there a motion for acting chair today from a review board member?
I nominate Stephen Ellis as acting chair.
Thank you.
I second.
Oh, thank you, Board Member Lattimore and Board Member O'Malley. For the vote on acting chair of having Board Member Ellis serve as acting chair for today, I will be doing a roll call vote. How do you vote, Board Member Boyd?
In favor.
Board Member Ellis?
In favor.
Board Member Jacobs?
Aye.
Board Member Lattimore?
Favor.
Board Member Nelson?
In favor.
And Board Member O'Malley?
Aye.
Great. I will now hand the meeting over to Board Member Ellis.
Thank you, and good afternoon. I am calling this public hearing to order at 4:34 p.m. in accordance with the Building Emission Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance regulation adopted pursuant to the Building Emission Reduction Disclosure Ordinance, Boston City Code Ordinances, Section 7-2.2. The BERDO Review Board will hold a virtual public hearing at 4:30 on May 13th to review the following topics in regard to the reduction of greenhouse gases from building energy production and consumption so as to promote the public health and welfare of Boston residents. In accordance with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Executive Order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, we are conducting this public meeting online. To ensure public access to the deliberations of the BERDO Review Board, the public may access this call through telephone and video conferencing. Members of the public will have an opportunity to ask questions and provide public comment. To do so, please raise your hand or type in the chat in the application via the Zoom meeting platform. If you are calling in and cannot use the platform, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. Send your question to staff via email at berdoreviewboard@boston.gov. For the record, I am Stephen Ellis, acting chair of the board. I will now conduct a roll call of board members. Board members, please say your name in the order that they appear on the slide.
Rashida Boyd.
Stephen Ellis.
Lavette Jacobs.
Gail Lattimore.
Jack Nelson.
And Matt O'Malley.
Thank you. Staff will now introduce themselves.
Hannah Payne, Director of Carbon Neutrality in the Environment Department.
Sorry, Diana Vasquez, BERDO Review Board manager in the Environment Department.
Seema Mujahid, Environment Department.
And I see that Aiden Callan is joining now.
Okay. We'll just wait a second here.
It looks like he may be connected. Aiden, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm sorry. I'm just hopping on now. Aiden Callan, a BERDO program manager, just working right now to make sure everybody's able to report their data by May 15th, and yeah, glad to be joining you all.
Thank you, everyone. Here is the agenda for today. We'll start with hearing two proposals regarding the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund from the Environment Department. After that, the Environment Department will share with us an update on the reporting extension request. Then they will provide administrative updates. After that, we'll move on to the approval of the move-in minutes, and finally, we will adjourn. The first agenda item is proposal to open the first application cycle of the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund. Continuing our conversation from the last meeting about the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund, Diana will present a proposal for the first application cycle.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I can kick us off with the first proposal for the fund. So just to provide the context again, or as a refresher, here's the text from the ordinance regarding the fund. So the fund will be expended for the support, implementation, and administration of local building carbon abatement projects that benefit the city of Boston's emissions reduction goals, and fund expenditures shall prioritize projects that benefit environmental justice populations. I won't read each exact bullet point, but just as a refresher of what is stated in the ordinance. And as a reminder of where we are with the fund currently, so the fund has been seeded with $3.5 million by the mayor. Wanted to state this because I don't think we've said this before, but 175 of dollars from the fund has been expended to date on community advisory group facilitation. So the hiring of a facilitator for the community advisory group that helped with the regulations development, and stipends for the review board as well. Alternative compliance payments will go directly into the fund in the future. So the fund will receive ACPs as well as penalties, and the BERDO review board will review project proposals, make recommendations for expenditures, and set expenditures from the fund. So I wanted to start with the public feedback opportunity. As you may remember, we had a public feedback opportunity that was opened on March 15th, and it closed recently on April 30th. So in total, we received 3 letters, or 3 organizations submitted letters. They were A Better City, Boston Climate Action Network, and Sierra Club, Massachusetts. 50 ACE members, or Alternatives for Community and Environment members, sent in emails, and 10 individuals responded to the fund survey. That was the Google form survey that was shared publicly. So some key themes or summary of the public feedback that we received on the draft application outline. So this was to give an idea of what the application process, what the questions would be for folks who would be interested in applying. We received suggestions to request more information from the applicants. So one, asking an applicant to describe some of their funding accomplishments. So if it's a program that they're running, what are some accomplishments from that program from the previous 3 years? Asking for an applicant's financial size and stability. So requesting a 990 form. Nonprofits had to have public financial disclosure. So this would be a 990 form for nonprofits. References for project team members. And if they were contractors who received funding, a request a list of relevant projects and references. We've also received a suggestion to cut the question asking for resumes for folks who may be interested in applying for the fund. We received suggestions to add tenant-specific questions. So whether any tenants would be displaced and plans for relocation assistance, and to ask if building owners would be willing to sign a rent stabilization agreement in the application form itself. And then we received a suggestion to ask a question explicitly asking about plans to use labor from local, cooperative, MBWE, minority business women enterprise, disadvantaged business enterprises, and or local workforce development programs. So as folks may remember, we have that in our project evaluation form, but the feedback was to add a question more explicitly in the application form itself. For the draft evaluation form, we received a suggestion to emphasize the need for building emissions reduction. So to make it more clear that that is a requirement. Therefore, if your project does not have that, your project would not be eligible to receive funding. We received suggestion to add a new section that clarified how projects will be evaluated during and after a project is selected to receive funding. And then request to clarify the criteria that is related to indoor air quality and other criteria. So just some updates that the city thought we thought we could do based on this feedback. We think it's makes sense to update the question on the application form to allow an applicant to include any accomplishments that they think would be appropriate to add to their application, especially if it's a program that's already running. You know, it seems like it makes sense for an applicant to be able to share some accomplishments that's already been happening. We clarified that the Google form will ask for a 990 form, so that will be requested from an applicant. And we think it makes sense to add a question of the applicant and any subcontractors if they qualify for any of these criteria, meaning the plans to use labor from a local co-op, MBWE, or disadvantaged business enterprise. For the draft evaluation form, we thought it made sense to also update the evaluation form to make it more clear that building emissions reduction is required. So we can update that form as well to make sure that it's like very clear to anybody who sees it, that that is like a mandatory component. And then very quickly, we have a summary of the Google form responses. So I'll just quickly read what we have here. 60% of respondents were aware of the fund, 40% were not. I should mention we had 10 respondents in total. 80% were interested in applying, 20% were unsure. 60% of the respondents were either a service provider or a building owner, and then 40% selected other. So we had some folks who kind of identified as like more than one. So we had one respondent who said they were a building owner and a service provider, one building owner and affordable housing administrator, one hospital administrator, and then one nonprofit worker. We received a wide range of buildings. So building uses included residential, commercial, medical, and education. So kind of a wide swath of building types. And there was high interest for projects related to all of the options. So energy efficiency, renewable energy, procuring renewable energy, switching fuels, maybe from a fossil fuel to electricity, and then other technology solutions. So an example we provided was like battery storage. So there was high interest in all of those types of projects. A majority of the respondents, 66%, are interested in scoping. So it seems a lot of folks are more in the like scoping stage, seeing what's viable for their situation. 33% are interested in funding a phase of a project. So if they already have something in mind, but would like to like bolster that with some additional funding. And then one respondent shared other. A majority of respondents, 40%, are unsure how much money they are interested in. 30% said they were interested between $1 to $3 million. 20% said 50 to 500,000, and 10% said 500,000 to $1 million. And then all of the respondents believe that they could incorporate some sort of environmental justice. So we included the list that's included in the project evaluation form, and they all said that they could include components or elements of those environmental justice benefits in their project proposal. So it does seem that that won't be a hindrance. More so, it seemed that folks just weren't quite sure what project they wanted yet. It seemed like a lot were more in scoping versus having already selected a project. And then there were some additional comments. I shared that in our shared May folder, so you can see the full letters and the full Google responses. If you have more questions or if you want to see the full details, they're in our shared folder. So I just wanted to also review our proposal. So this is the same proposal we shared in our last meeting. So the proposal for this first application cycle from the city is that the review board release up to $750,000 for this first application cycle as a grant agreement. So this means only nonprofits or organizations with a fiscal sponsor could apply for the fund. And we delved a little bit more. We kind of teased it out a little bit more. So this is the proposed process that we are putting forward. We would release a notice for the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund granting opportunity. We propose opening the application Friday, May 31st and closing it Friday, July 12th. For eligibility, applicants would have to be nonprofit organizations, so registered 501c3 organizations or organizations with a fiscal sponsor, and projects must include some component of reductions in building emissions in Boston and benefits to environmental justice populations and populations disproportionately impacted by air pollution. I shared a draft of what this notice would look like, also in the May folder, but it has more details of what we would share publicly. The form itself would be a Google form that would flesh out all the questions from the application form outline. And so it would be the actual Google form that applicants would fill out. But I do want to flag that we would accept alternative methods of submission if the Google form didn't work for folks. We're very willing to work with any applicant who's interested in the money. And so if paper copy works better, we would also be happy to do that. Our proposal is to grant multiple awards targeting up to 250 per award. So if the total is 750 $250,000. It could look like 3 recipients, each receiving $250,000. With the note that this is subject to change based on the applications received and the board's discretion. So the board will ultimately have discretion on how the award money gets split. But this is the proposal that we think could make sense to target. We would develop FAQs and host 2 information sessions for interested parties. So right now we propose having 2 information sessions, 1 in person and 1 virtual on June 13th and June 20th. So this is what the timeline would look like. We open the application on May 31st, host an in-person information session June 13th, host a virtual information session on June 20th, and then close the application on July 12th. For a proposed outreach plan, we plan to share the granting opportunity via a new equitable emissions investment fund website, the City of Boston Grants website. So this is the city's like master website of all of the granting opportunities within the city. Reaching out to individuals who responded to the public feedback opportunity and the indicated interest. So we had 1 person share her email with us, so we could reach out back to her. Via our newsletters, of course, so the BERDO newsletter, the BERDO Review Board newsletter, the Environment Department newsletter, the Environment Department's social media, reaching out to community partners and community advisory group members. And of course, with the review board members, we hope you would also share the opportunity. And then we plan to work with the Environment Department's community engagement manager to help spread the opportunity more widely. The Environment Department recently, within the last month or so, has onboarded community engagement managers, which we're very excited about, so we can work more closely with them and reach more folks. And then I just wanted to remind folks again how we plan to evaluate the submitted applications. So the review board will evaluate submitted applications based on the following criteria, and they will be evaluated at a public hearing. So the hearing itself will be open to the public, and will be based on the applications themselves will be evaluated based on these criteria here. This is just a summary of what the overall process will look like, or what we're proposing for the overall process to look like. So right now we're in the setting up the application phase. But if the review board is in favor and votes yes, we can start opening the application, and we'll release the notice more widely, release an FAQs of what we think will be frequently asked questions, have the application form go live on May 31st, post the information sessions and answer questions as they come in. So Ziggy and I would be sort of main point of contacts for any interested parties who may have questions about the applications. We would close the application on July 12th. The Environment Department would read each application, notify the applicants of their submission, answer any questions that they may have, and sort out any non-eligible projects. We will then prepare the packets with a summary and a cover page for each application for each board member. So you will receive the application packets prior to a hearing, so you can preview the applications, make notes to yourself, etc. And then at a public hearing, we will discuss the applications themselves. The applicant may be present. The applicant may even prepare some slides to review their application to the board. The board may ask some questions to the applicant. And then the review board will vote by simple majority on the funding decisions up until $750,000 has been reached. And then finally, the grantee will sign a grant agreement with any conditions that were stipulated by the board with the grant money. So as proposed next steps, we propose that the review board release up to $750,000 for the first grant application cycle of the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund as presented, with notes or caveats that the actual funding of awards to specific projects would be made during future public hearings and at the discretion of the board. And the board may choose, to make multiple awards or just one award, or may choose not to expend the full $750 if they don't feel that the applications received merits $750,000. Yes. So that's all I have, Chair. Back to you.
All right, thank you, Diana. I will now ask each board member if they have any questions or comments. So we'll be starting with you, Board Member Boyd.
No, not at this moment, thank you.
No problem. All right, so over to me. I'm going to be responding based on the order of the slides that I'd seen. I just wanted to get some quick feedback on how the city or the environment department responded to the suggestions regarding the tenant specific suggestions, and I can pinpoint the exact slide that I'm referring to. Just give me one moment. Believe that was slide number 10, where there was some suggestions to add tenant-specific questions. I'm curious what were your responses to those that made those suggestions?
I can respond. So I think we were hoping that the project evaluation form, I should have added it into, or I can share it in the chat maybe. So there's one of the criteria is benefits to tenants. And so if applicable, one of the things that could help strengthen a project proposal would be if there are any sort of rent stabilization or relocation plans, if applicable to a tenant. We also do have a question in the application outline right now that asks for any support from tenants. So for example, if you want a letter of support, you could ask your tenants to sort of have that sort of support. And there is a question in there regarding any sort of effects to tenants that your proposed application would have. We didn't add more questions, which I think the suggestion does ask for more explicit questions. So that's how we responded.
Okay, thank you. I was just wondering how you sort of navigated the responding to that, because to see those kinds of questions listed there, it quite direct, and so I was just curious what was the responses there. All right, moving on. The two next things I just want to applaud or say that it's good to hear. It's great to hear that there was such a large, mighty few, but a large interest in scoping. So I'm glad to see that there is a sense of agreement amongst the community members that scoping is what they would be hoping for us to focus on. The next thing, also want to say congrats on hiring the community engagement manager. I hope that bears fruit for you all and further engages the community in the best way possible. One point of clarification, I think there may need to be an update to the evaluation form. Because it does sound like, from what I'm hearing, is that the applications that we'll be receiving are about nonprofits. And so we would be reviewing these organizations. And so the current evaluation form asked us to review based on a project. And so we might need to tweak the language or update the language of the evaluation form. So it's not about a project, it's about an organization, and in this case, a nonprofit. So I just wanted to put that out there. In case future boards may ask that same question, like, why are we evaluating projects or being asked to evaluate projects when in reality, if we do approve this today, we would be evaluating nonprofits instead. So I hope what I'm saying makes sense.
I think that makes sense. Sorry, I'm out of son. I think we can tweak the language to make it clear. It's sort of like the program or projects, that they're putting forward. So I think it's not so much the nonprofit themselves, but maybe like the program that they are hoping to bolster with the fund or
Okay. So maybe I'm misunderstanding, because I guess when I'm reading this, it sounds like we are evaluating for 3 organizations to receive up to 250, at max 303 organizations to receive $250,000. So maybe I'm not clear on understanding what exactly we're evaluating, because it sounds like a nonprofit would submit, this is the kind of works and series of projects that they would be working on, and we're going to be reviewing a series of projects that nonprofit has the capabilities to do. But it almost also sounds like we're judging the organization that whole, and I do see Board Member Lattimore's suggestion, and thank you for that. So maybe I'm reading 2 different things in 2 different ways. One aspect that they're proposing things, but they're also being given the money to to make decisions on our behalf, which is what has come up in past boards about sort of an aspect of us relinquishing over to the nonprofits itself. So I will hold back that comment, or pull back on that comment for right now. If there's not any other confusion, then I will see what our other board members have to say about that. I just wanted to see if there was a point of confusion. Maybe I'm the only one that has that. So I am going to move on and ask, do you have any questions or comments, Board Member Jacobs?
Not at the moment. I'm just following along.
Thank you. All right, and over to you, Board Member Lattimore.
Thank you, Acting Chair Ellis. Now that you remind me, because I'm sorry, I apologize. I didn't get a chance to review all the materials during the weekend, Mother's Day weekend. And also was riding in my car at the beginning of this session, so just got in a stable location. So maybe I'm incorrect with my what I put in the chat rather, which is because we're now saying we want to make is this a proposal to have nonprofits administer the monies and make grants? Is that what we're doing? I'm just trying to remember. So, is that correct?
So the grants would be to kind of like bolster, support a nonprofit running programming. So if I don't have like a good example, but if a nonprofit, for example, I was already running programming that would fit this, so they had some sort of building decarbonization component to their programming, the grant would sort of be helping support that. Maybe they want to expand their program, maybe they're, they could say, with the 250, we could serve 10 more families. So we're applying to the grant to be able to expand our programming. That's sort of the idea. So my understanding is the legal separation of a grant versus like hiring a consultant is that a grant is meant to sort of support a nonprofit's programming or support a nonprofit's mission, depending on what that nonprofit does.
So I think I need to go back and re-review some of these materials. So my questions can be relevant, but I guess the overarching question that I have is the time frame, given that the proposal is to put the the RFP, if you call it that, on the street on the 31st of May, and then bring back have responses in by July 12th. I just wondered if that's adequate time for folks to respond, given summer is upon us. So that was one thing, and then how that tied to the overall schedule for the city in terms of keeping BERDO on track. So that was one comment. I was also pleased to see, although I didn't catch how many people responded to the how to use the funds, that 66% is interested in scoping, is what I understand. And so that was really helpful to see that. So just, then, but related to that, so the question I guess I have is, is that timeframe, May 31st and then July 12th for responses, is that adequate, or will changing or extending that timeframe by a couple of weeks impact the overall calendar that the city projects for the BERDO process in a negative or other way? And then I had a question about the so that's one issue, one question. The other question was about scoping versus designing. I think I understand the distinction between scoping and designing, but if you could, Diana, give us any clarity on that, scoping, designing. I think we've gone through it before, but if you could just remind us, that would be helpful.
Sure thing. So scoping and the way that we presented it in the Google form is sort of like, you don't really have any idea. You're kind of just step one, scoping what the different options are for you. And designing / engineering is like, you kind of selected a pathway, and now it's time to get more of the detailed, all right, so now what are the actual technical aspects we need to start thinking about? Because every building's different and every building has different needs. Maybe there needs to be mold remediation before you can even start with the project that you want, so designing, engineering is getting more focused on that, whatever selection you made during the scoping process.
Mhm.
And then in terms of timeline, yes, so our proposal is to open the application itself on May 31st, but then the application wouldn't close until July 12th. So I think that's like 6-ish weeks.
Okay.
Of course, if the board were totally open to the board's recommendation, if the board thought it would be more helpful to get for organizations to learn about the proposal and have more time and, like, you know, scale or slide the timeline a couple weeks, so we're totally open to that as well. It's not I don't think there's any other than, I guess, September 1 being the deadline for building portfolios and individual compliance schedules. I don't think there are any reasons why we couldn't slide the timeline a bit.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
Yeah, if I may just add in, the timeline is really, as Diana said, around the boards, trying to slot it in where the board may have more availability. We don't really anticipate that this grant will be able to fund projects that are implemented before the 2025 compliance period. So really for those building owners that are looking at that and need some flexibility, that they apply for flexibility measures to give them that ability to make a plan and come into compliance for future years, and maybe apply for this, but being realistic in terms of when the funding will get spent and projects spent. And then going back to a question that Stephen asked, in the application, they will have to propose a project. So it's not just going to any nonprofit for their work. It has to be specific to the a specific project that they're proposing to use the funds for.
Just really quick, I'm sorry, I did say I didn't have any other questions, but just one quick follow-up. So we have to, as a board, review board, make a decision on, you know, which nonprofit or nonprofits are selected. And what is that time frame, or do you have you know, is that like, if the applications are due July 12th, is it thinking that the following review board meeting, we will make a decision, or is there any thought on timing? That question makes sense?
No, I think the question makes sense. I haven't thought about, I don't think it would be the next hearing. I think we probably need a little more time to read each application. So I could imagine maybe if not the hearing after, or maybe the one after that, because like we do want to also let the applicants know that their application was going to be heard at a public meeting, at a public hearing with the review board. Because I can imagine, like, if review board members have questions, the applicant can answer them themselves about their programming. So I think even the deliberation and review process will also take some time, I can imagine.
Thank you. No other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Lattimore. And first off, happy Mother's Day to all the mothers. I should have said that early on. And in addition, Hannah, thank you for that response. I just want to clarify, I think maybe where I'm getting a little bit mixed up, I get that they can submit a project, but is there an opportunity for a nonprofit to submit a series of projects? Because, you know, some of them have multiple programmings that are going on at one time. And so does the application sort of allow for that, just out of curiosity?
I think that it could. I think they would just submit, kind of detail out different projects or tasks that they would include in their overall project. Okay,
thank you. Well, then, again, I strike my original suggestion about updating the evaluation form. Now things are a bit more clear for me, and appreciate that context there. All right, over to you, Board Member Nelson. Any questions or comments?
Yes, thank you. So just to clarify, the applicant can be a not-for-profit building owner or a contractor who is a not-for-profit?
Yes, so to be eligible to apply, yeah, you would have to be a nonprofit, but I think that means you have to be so as long as they're a registered 501c3 or have or have a fiscal sponsor, they would be eligible to apply.
So it's the building owner as well as a contractor that's not the building owner could apply.
Yes, so it could be any nonprofit. It is
Okay.
what the guidance we have gotten is that it's clearest cut when it is a nonprofit that is providing like building decarbonization services or some sort of programming, that they would work with other building owners on that.
Okay.
It's harder, it's like a little bit more of a gray area for a nonprofit building owner that is looking to do work in their own building. That would have to then have that public purpose. So if it's something related to their public, their programming that is a public benefit, and then that could be considered, but we'd have to review that with the law department. So it's a lot clearer if it is like a nonprofit providing services, like building decarbonization programming or services, rather than a nonprofit looking to do work in their own building.
Okay.
But we could evaluate those on a case-by-case basis.
Okay. Should the application spell that out?
Yes, and I think Diana, we put in some language to that, if we're putting in some language to that effect in the FAQs, but I think we can further clarify that to make that as clear as possible.
Okay. And this is for implementation to achieve carbon emissions reduction. It's not answering the call for scoping studies. I know we have additional grant funds that we're going to be talking about later, but this is not for scoping studies.
It does not preclude scoping studies. It could be, but it is not exclusively for that. So if there was a nonprofit that proposed doing that sort of work, I think that could be considered.
Okay. So I thought one of the slides we looked at said that the funds must go towards carbon emissions, because a scoping study is a pile of paper that
It's
a lot of times
carbon
ends up on
abatement
the
projects. I think that I think that we could make that, it's an important step to achieving that. So I think we can make that argument that it's related to a carbon abatement project.
Okay, so it could be for implementation or the study of projects that will reduce
Yes.
carbon emissions. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Nelson. And, I shared that similar concern in the past because, sort of being stuck on, not necessarily stuck on, I don't know if that's the right word, but we're focused on the carbon emissions. So, Hannah, thank you for updating that language for carbon abatement possibilities, because I think that's where some folks can get lost in the confusion about how the scoping project reducing emission, but essentially it is phase 0 is what I would call it with respects to reducing carbon. So I appreciate that clarification. Over to you, Board Member O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll try to keep it brief. First off, wanted to thank all those, although we didn't have a tremendous number. I think, Diana, you said it was about 10 respondents who had filled out at least one of the forms. It shows that when you take the time to share your opinion, quite often those suggestions are going to be interpreted or going to be added to the final product. And we've seen that as the city on both the application and the evaluation form took some public feedback to make it better. And so I know I'm preaching to the choir when I talk about our friends who are on this call and are with us every other week. But please, to all of us, if we can activate our networks to get involved, it will show what a ecumenical and transparent process this has become. So well done once again to the BERDO team. Secondly, and I think, we've heard this, Gail and Jack articulated very well two of the points that I'd like to raise. It sounds to me that we actually have a little more flexibility with these grant proposals. In the last 2 meetings, we were talking about option 1 versus option 2. I had some concerns about option 1. I can say those concerns have been abated, and I think that this plan makes a lot of sense. I will be supporting it if we could bring it up for a vote today, but I do see enormous utility in getting the ball rolling with this. The board still maintains, and I'm saying this, but please correct me if I'm wrong, Hannah, Diana, or anyone else from the team. It sounds to me we can, while it is a very aggressive timeline to get this out by the end of the month, and then really the month of June, it would allow us to publicize this well, solicit feedback. As always, the BERDO team will be working with any potential applicants on making sure they have strong applications. We then, as the board, can vote on them. We'll publicly have these in a public forum, as a public meeting. And we don't have to, if we don't have enough quality proposals, we don't have to expend the full amount. It's not as though we lose this money if we don't spend it. So I think it makes sense. I like having the flexibility. My concern early on in prior conversations and prior meetings about this was that somehow we'd be basically signing a blank check over to a nonprofit, although a very, very worthwhile endeavor to do so. It seems to me that this will allow us to have a little more control and partnership going forward. So I think it makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate all the work that you folks have done with the law department internally, with external factors or players as well, to make sure that this is a strong proposal. I will end by saying this. I can tell you from my own experience, I spend a lot of time in other cities now, and invariably folks want to hear about the BERDO process. This Equitable Admissions Fund is a nationwide leader. There are other cities around the country that are looking to Boston to follow our lead. So I'm incredibly proud of each and every one of you for your great work, and proud to be part of the team, and excited to make it happen. So that is all, Mr. Chair. Not so much a question as much as a comment.
Well, here, for that one. We will now open the meeting to public comment. As a reminder, members of the public, to provide public comment, please raise your hand or type in the chat in the application via the Zoom meeting platform. If you are calling in and cannot use the platform, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. Send your questions to staff via email at berdoreviewboard@boston.gov. Again, as a reminder, we are limiting the questions to 3 minutes to ensure everyone has a chance to speak. We also ask members of the public to introduce themselves and their neighborhood. We will now wait to give a few members of the public the opportunity to provide comments. All right, I already see one hand up, and it's Eve. Go right ahead.
Hi, Stephen. Great to see you. Thank you for all the work on this. My comments were just a couple of questions. Are there any limits to the length of the project? And excuse me if this has been discussed before, I did miss a meeting, but like when they're proposing it, does the project need to be done in X amount of time? And then the other question is, I know that the evaluation criteria are about how to decide which projects to fund. Do we have anything in place to monitor the projects, to make sure throughout the project's life that they are actually doing what is asked for, so we don't get to the end of the period and find out that the project actually hasn't gone in the way that was anticipated, and etc. So those are two questions.
All right, Diana or Hannah, would you like to take that question?
Sure, I can start. So I believe the first question was, is there like a time frame requirement or a time limit requirement for when the money should be spent by a recipient, like if they were awarded money from the fund? I'd have to check the regulations and the ordinance. I don't believe there's any language in there that says the money needs to be spent within X amount of days. What I will say is that we are in the ordinance, we do have to make an annual report on the fund. So we have to share publicly how the money has been spent, and then any sort of anticipated benefits from projects. And so we haven't like written this down yet, but we can start working on this as well. So essentially Ziggy or I could schedule, depending on how long the project will take, monthly check-in, based on our research on how other grants are working in the city. People send like monthly Google forms, or they set up monthly phone calls with recipients, depending on the time frame of the project. So if it's a really long-term project, they'll do monthly check-ins over a couple years. If it's just like a 3-month project, maybe it's just 3 check-ins. But yes, there would be a continual touch point with recipients, especially because we have to publish an annual report. And we need to make sure that we get the data we need for that, as well as just generally keeping tabs on how our project is unraveling or proceeding. And then in the regulations, we have written that should a recipient not comply with any conditions that they have with the funding, they may become ineligible to apply for future funding from the fund.
Yeah, and I would just add there, to clarify, we don't have any limit. So, but we do in the application process ask for a estimated project start time and end time. So that's something the board can consider in making evaluation or awards is, how long will this project be? Is it realistic? And then I will point you to in the regulations on page 51, under conditions for expenditure, there are standard conditions that will apply to awards made through the fund. So some of those include that for long-term projects that include distinct phases, they have to have a schedule for allocating the award. So, the board could decide that, if it's let's say in this case, a $250,000 project, and they're proposing doing it over 3 years, maybe 50, there would be check-in points and there would be distinct phases of when that funding would be released. And then reporting requirements, and that the frequency of the reporting may vary according to the project's lifetime. So those are things that would be determined during the awarding process of, how often they'd be reporting to the board and or to staff, and then any timelines and kind of decision-making in terms of moving forward and expending more funds.
Okay, thank you, Diana and Hannah. It's always good to go back to the original language on something like this. And Eve, I appreciate the question. I also want to give a little bit more time in case there's anyone else that may have a public comment that they would like to share, public comment or question. All right, so if there are no further public comments or questions, I want to remind us that we are actually going into a process to make a motion momentarily. But before we do that, I just want to check to see if any other board members had any final questions or comments that they would like to ask before we move into the motion. Board Member Lattimore.
Yes, if you can remember, if staff can remind me, people who are building owners with smaller, buildings, meaning not BERDO eligible, are also eligible, correct, for this fund? Is that correct?
Correct. They can apply, and that's, I think, and also they can be served by the nonprofit that is doing this. That's a consideration for the board to consider in the awarding process, but there's no limitations on them.
Okay, thank you for reminding me.
Okay, so given from what I've heard today, I've only heard one minor proposal of making sure certain languages are clear regarding abatement, carbon abatement inside the application process. So I have heard from Board Member O'Malley that there was some level of support. So I'm going to ask, is there a motion to approve the city's proposal?
Mr. Chair, I move that we, I'm sorry, I move that this review board releases up to $750,000 for the first grant application as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, so on the motion to approve the city proposal to release up to $750,000 on this phase one proposal, I'm going to go down the line. How do you vote, Board Member Boyd?
In favor.
I will say aye as well. How do you vote, Board Member Jacobs?
Aye.
How do you vote, Board Member Lattimore?
I guess I have a question before I vote, and that was, when you said a proposal, I wondered if that proposal included, or would it be separate from the issue of potentially extending the date for the submission of the proposal? Or is it just about the proposal, yes or no, and the date issue for the submission of the proposals? Is this totally separate? I'm just trying to understand kind of.
Valid question. And Diana or Hannah, do you have any advice on that? Could we potentially, if we vote to approve, where is the boundary for us to say, let's extend the deadline or extend the application cycle?
Yeah, so I think you have two options. One, you could make a motion with that amendment to have the application period open for longer. Another option could be to vote on the proposal as is, and then at a later date, if it's necessary to extend the deadline for the applications, that could be extended during the application period.
Thank you. So having said that, hearing that, I would personally be in favor of the motion if there's an opportunity to think about extending the time frame. So that's my vote. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, staff.
Just to clarify, Board Member Lattimore, I'm making sure I want to note this down appropriately. So voting to approve today, but ensuring that we have the opportunity to reevaluate and extend the application should we need to do so at a later date. Is that correct?
Yeah, but my vote is not contingent upon that per se.
Got it.
Because Hannah clarified that there is opportunity later. So I was just trying to figure out procedurally how things work. So I'm in favor as the proposal has been put on as the motion has been put on the table. I'm in favor with no amendments.
Thank you, Board Member Lattimore. And Diana, if you don't mind making a note for that being a pinpoint for us in the future. All right, Board Member Nelson, how do you vote?
In favor. Thank you.
And last but not least, Board Member O'Malley, how do you vote?
Aye.
All right, the ayes have it, and the motion passes. I'm trying to find my clapping emoji here so that we can move on. Thank you, everyone. So the second agenda item is the proposal to expend money from the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund to expand the new Building Decarbonization Advisor Program. Next, we will hear from the city. Next, we will hear from the city's next proposal regarding the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund. So I believe it's over to Hannah or Dima right now.
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. Dima here. So I'll give you a little bit of background. Last fall, the city of Boston was awarded around $660,000 from the Department of Energy via the Energy Efficiency Conservation Block Grant Program, which I'll refer to as EECBG from here on out, to develop a building decarbonization advisory program. With 2025's emission standards fast approaching and 2030 not too far behind, there is a heightened need for expert consultation services to guide stakeholders in implementing effective strategies to decarbonize their buildings. We're seeing many building owners are often the sole managers of their properties, and they're significantly under-resourced or lack the guidance and technical expertise that may be required to address these technical matters in their buildings and ultimately comply with BERDO. So our aim with this program is to provide planning and scoping work for these under-resourced BERDO building owners. And we're anticipating being able to serve about 60 buildings with the EECBG funds. Per the grant mandate, 40% of the funds must be spent in environmental justice neighborhoods, or as they call it, Justice 40. That's the first part of the program. The second part would be extending support to building owners to implement the energy efficiency measures that are outlined in these plans that they're getting provided with. We're aiming to mitigate costs for the specified equipment and systems by leveraging incentives and rebates from the Mass Safe program and the Inflation Reduction Act, and the funds from the American Rescue Plan Act, which is around $500,000, will be used to support the energy efficiency and emission reduction projects in these eligible buildings. So they will complement these incentives and cover any remaining expenses for quick win decarbonization projects that are identified through this scoping. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, this program is designed to serve under-resourced BERDO building owners. If you're residential, you might be a self-managed building with low condo fees or below market rents, low income and affordable housing, older buildings, older residential buildings. We have a lot of them in the city, and Justice 40 and environmental justice census tracts as well. If you're a commercial building, we're looking at small businesses, nonprofits, and houses of worships, while prioritizing just those in Justice 40 and environmental justice neighborhoods as well. Next slide. So the program we're proposing is to contract a building science firm that is a Mass Save preferred vendor in order to maximize Mass Save incentives. Eligible building owners would receive customized zero overtime plans and a BERDO compliance strategy, as well as technical recommendations for energy efficiency and decarbonization projects. We're proposing to target around $10,000 per building with a cap of $15,000. The additional ARPA funding I mentioned before may be applied to close those gaps in small projects that are implemented in 2025 and 2026. Given the size and the time it takes to generate these plans, we're proposing to group them into cohorts, which would run for approximately 3 to 4 months each. The building science firm, based on their capacity, would be able to tell us the number of buildings we're able to serve in each cohort, and will of course allow for rolling applications for following cohorts. Next slide. When it comes to the fund, we're proposing to add this into our program in order to expand the capacity of buildings we're serving with the Decarbonization Advisory Program. So the additional $500,000 used from this fund would serve about 50 additional BERDO buildings. The scope I mentioned earlier with zero overtime plans and any energy efficiency recommendations would remain the same, whether it's for the EECBG funds or the EEIF funds. If we're using money from the fund, the vendor we hire will be required to provide periodic updates to the review board, and the review board may add any criteria for selecting the building owners served by the fund. So a little proposed timeline for you. We would release the request for proposals following any approvals and processes, and we'd leave that open for about 4 to 6 weeks. With an interview period of 1 week at the end, where we would make an award and contract the selected vendor, ideally by September of this year. And once the vendor would be hired, we could run our first cohort this coming fall. And the goal would be to have the first cohort receive their completed plans by the end of the year, with the second one starting in 2025, early 2025. Given the scope and time it takes, this would be most likely a multi-year contract that we're looking at. Slide. So in conclusion, we're proposing the review board expend around $550,000 from the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund in order to expand the Building Decarbonization Advisory Program, as I've presented. An alternative option would be to forego using the fund into the program at this time, with the option of perhaps releasing a separate request for proposals next year for scoping and planning tasks that has leveraged any insights we've gained from this program's initial cohort. And with that, back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Dean. I appreciate it. I will now ask each board member if they have any questions or comments. And in fact, I'll be going in reverse order this time. So Board Member O'Malley, any questions or comments?
Yeah, I do see utility in trying to do these both expenditures together. I think we could even maybe have something on the website, almost like a flow chart, which would be a better opportunity, because there's no doubt we're going to hear from a lot of folks who would be interested in one or both. I guess my question would be, and this doesn't sway my position on whether or not we vote on this today, is, you know, should ARPA funding, should Department of Energy funding dry up? How would that impact expenditures that we make now?
So that funding that we identified, that has already been allocated to that we can use for this project specifically. So really what we are, we're ready to move on issuing an RFP with those two funding sources. We're really just considering adding in additional money from the fund to be able to serve more building owners with the same scope of work.
Sorry, I totally get that.
Oh.
I guess my point is, it going in you know, the next year, the year after that, should that sort of federal partnership in this not exist, would it jeopardize the program?
Yes, this is those two funding sources. Sorry for not understanding your question the first time. The federal funding is one-time allocations. We don't expect to receive that funding in the future. So we don't have any current ability to expand or extend this program with federal funds at this time. So it'd be just what we have today.
So our modeling, perfect. That's what I want to hear. So our modeling in the future isn't contingent on other funding sources for this to work. So yeah, I think it makes sense. It's an aggressive timeline to do both. It'll make for some late nights at the office this summer, but it's all in the name of a great cause. So appreciate this work. I think it makes sense, and would certainly be supportive if the rest of the board is as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member O'Malley. Over to you, Board Member Nelson. Do you have any questions or comments?
Yeah, so the total funds that would be potentially granted would be the 660 plus the 500,000. So it's about 1.16 or something like that.
Yes, if you're not counting the funds from the EEIF.
Oh, so if we add the EEIF, it's another 500 then?
Yes, it would be about 1.66 million.
Okay. And if we were granting 15,000 per building, we could make a pretty big impact here. That's a lot of studies.
Yeah, to clarify, or whoever has the slides, if you go, did we put this all on one slide? If you go to actually the next slide, sorry. Nope, one more. This one, okay. There's like two pieces to this proposal. One is the planning, scoping, and technical assistance. That is what we are proposing adding in the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund to. So that is the what we're currently using the EECBG funds for. So that's $660,000. We're proposing adding in $500,000 to support that, so that at $10,000 to $15,000 per building, we could support around 100 buildings, maybe 110 buildings. Then there's a second part to this, is the ARPA funds. What is unique about ARPA funds is that they do not have that restriction in being able to spend them on in-building projects. So while it's not a lot of money when we're thinking about, big deep energy retrofit projects, $500,000 goes very quickly. But we did want to reserve that ARPA money for being able to close gaps in projects for under-resourced buildings that they can do immediately or in the next couple of years, because that needs to be expended by the end of 2026. So our proposal was to reserve those funds to be able to, if an under-resourced building owner identifies a project that can be partially funded through Mass Save, but not entirely funded through Mass Save, that they could get some of that funding from the ARPA money. So it would be about 1.1 million for the zero overtime planning and the technical advising.
Right, and then the opera funds is, what's the value of that?
$500,000.
Okay, so that's a separate application then.
It would be a separate task that could be bid on separately in the RFP.
Okay. Okay, but the 1.16 is for study type work for Mass Save approved vendors to react to. And can we bring on multiple of those companies? Those TA study vendors who are Mass Save approved?
Yes.
But do we can bring multiples because we're going to need that.
Yes, yes. I think one of our that's something that we're writing would write in the RFP is that we may make multiple awards. Yeah, we want to try to balance the overhead, but also being able to serve a good number of buildings, and that's also why we're proposing this cohort structure, so that we could kind of tailor it to the firms that we get responses from and their availability.
Okay. Okay. Yep. I'm in full support of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Nelson. Board Member Lattimore, any questions or comments?
I would ask if you could go back, thank you, yes, to the slide that you were just on. I'm trying to make sure I understand the proposal. So I'm trying to make sure I understand the difference between this proposal and what we just voted on. And so we are now saying that this is for scoping projects and we want building science contractors to do this work and be responsible for taking this money and working with building owners. So it's but that also is part of what can happen in the Equitable Emissions Fund also, correct? Just the one that we just voted on. People can scope out their work in the same way, their projects in the same way. I'm just trying to make sure I understand the difference, or if these are very similar, with the exception of who's doing it, meaning the building science firms and the amount, the cap per building. I'm just trying to make sure I understand.
Yeah. So this is a process that the Environment Department would issue a request for proposals and do a public procurement process where the city would contract with the vendor. So the place where the review board would have a say is, the city, we're writing the scope of work, which we've given you the outline of here, and selecting the vendor that would do this work. The review board, you would have say over the types of buildings served, and or if you want to actually select the individual buildings that are served through the $500,000 that would be from the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund. For the EECBG money and the ARPA money, the city would be making decisions on who's getting that. So that wouldn't necessarily be coming to the board, but it would be, so you would have say over that, who's being served by that $500,000 to receive this funding. But the city would be writing the scope, evaluating the proposals, and selecting the vendor or vendors that would be providing these services. So it's a little bit more rigid, and the scope is set by the city. With the grant funding, that has to go to a nonprofit. I think that it could go to a nonprofit that is doing this kind of work, but more likely, I think, maybe like a more creative response in terms of how nonprofits are working with on building decarbonization efforts. So I think we could see something like this, but it may have a different scope of work. It may be, yeah, it wouldn't be as prescriptive as this.
Okay, that helps. Thank you. I just wondered also how the 10,000 and 15,000 per owner cap came. What was that based on? I'm just curious.
It is us trying to get a sense of, we want to serve a good number of buildings. I think that very likely that like an in-depth study, like a deep energy retrofit scoping, that can be tens of thousands of dollars. So I would say this is on the lower end, with the intention of really trying to serve more people and get them started was our thinking, rather than going deep with a few, just knowing that, you know, $660,000 is a lot of money and also can go very quickly. So the intention here was to try to be able to serve more building owners, and get them on a pathway to know what their BERDO strategy could be, where to start, kind of get them in the door and with some guidance and help, but not kind of take them the whole way.
Thank you. And can you just, last question, can you just describe that cohort model again? I'm trying to make sure I understand. So it would be the building science firms would have, I just want to make sure I understand what that cohort model is about.
Yeah, so we would have we would contract with the building science firms. They would have a contract for likely a few years. The cohort model would be, we would accept applications from building owners to become eligible to receive these services, depending on how many building owners the building science firms could serve in a given time. We would limit the number of building owners we accept, and then if we, you know, have more, we would open up, you know, a second cohort that we could serve until we've expended the money. Yeah, and allow for rolling applications. We expect people may hear about this from peers and not get their application in right away, so that also could build in kind of some ability for to reach more folks and not just the early actors.
The number of people going through at the same time as opposed to like them interacting with each other in other ways as a cohort. It's just an, okay, I think
Yeah, it's just a timing. Yeah.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Lattimore. Board Member Jacobs, do you have any questions or comments?
No questions at the moment.
Thank you, Board Member Jacobs. First off, I want to comment on, my appreciation of the fact that the Environment Department has been working to give us that level of flexibility that we've been talking about over the last few cycles of not picking one over the other, but offering different opportunities. And I think this is unique in itself, that you're sort of, I'm going to call it EEC, well, forgive me, there's a lot of letters there that I'm forgetting. EECBG, excuse me, plus. I'm seeing this as in addition to. I did have similar questions as Board Member Lattimore, and so Hannah, I just want to, double down to make sure that I'm understanding. It sounds like, even though we're putting or potentially voting to put an additional 500,000 into this, we still have some level of discretion rather than it just being put into a pool of money altogether. We still have some discretion over that 500,000. Am I understanding that correctly?
So the way that we are proposing this is that it would be, we would write in the RFP specific tasks that are the scoping and technical assistance tasks, and that the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund would be going towards those tasks. So the area where the board would have oversight, should you vote to approve this, would be in the types of buildings served. And the board, because for the EECBG program, or funding, the city will be reviewing applications and determining eligibility. Or there will be some eligibility determinations made on who's able to receive those funds. The board could have that discretion over who's receiving the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund technical services. We'll have to keep those separately in our invoicing and accounting anyway. So there's the discretion for the board to have that there. And the board could decide if you want to just set certain criteria that, you know, any building owner that meets X, Y, and Z criteria should be eligible to receive this funding, or if you want to kind of do a more detailed evaluation process for each of the applicants. That's a decision that you could make at a later date in terms of determining who's eligible. But that's kind of where the decision for the board would lay, is in that who's receiving those services.
Okay, thank you. You actually may have answered my second question, which was going to be, at what point are we deciding what those criteria are? So it sounds like we could, if we choose to approve this today, you know, there's another aspect of us either deciding or setting up what those criteria would look like, is what I'm understanding, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. So we have the general outline of, you know, serving underserved building owners, and would have to, you know, be in line with what is in the ordinance for the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund, but that could be determined at a later date, given that this will be a lengthy process to bring on the contractors.
Great. And so one last question I have is, I'm trying to wrap my head around, and I think you may have answered it, but just want to make sure I'm understanding it fully, what the application cycle will look like. Because, you know, this is one where I'm not really fully understanding what the timeline. I understand you have different cohorts, but when would this start, and how would we be sort of going through this cycle? And maybe I'm just not understanding this slide well, but hold on. Thank you, Diana, for coming back here, or whomever did it. Okay. So then this cycle would happen multiple times throughout the year, is what I'm understanding. Okay. All right. Well, then I'm in support of this. As I said, I appreciate this opportunity to have an additional option and potentially get to work with an additional 40 buildings. My goodness, my numbers are all over the place right now, but the additional 40 buildings in the process. So I have no further questions at this time. I'll turn it over to you, Board Member Boyd.
No questions, thank you.
Okay. We will now open the public meeting, the public comment period. As a reminder to members of the public, to provide a public comment, please raise your hand or type in the chat in the application via the Zoom meeting platform. If you are calling in and cannot use the platform, please raise your hand by pressing *9. Or send your questions to staff via the email at berdoreviewboard@boston.gov. Again, as a reminder, we are limiting questions to 3 minutes to ensure everyone has a chance to speak. We also ask that members of the public introduce themselves and their neighborhood. We will now wait to give members of the public the opportunity to provide comments. Okay, hearing no questions, I would like to go back to the board and ask if there are any other further discussions or questions that folks would like to have.
I just have a point of clarification, Mr. Chair. We've been talking about expending $500,000, but Dean, in my notes, I think you said this would cost $550,000. So I just want to make sure we're not undercutting ourselves. Which is the correct figure you'd be looking for action for today?
$500,000.
500 even.
The EEA.
Okay.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay, I'm sorry, I may have misheard it. Okay, thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Board Member O'Malley. Any other questions or comments from the board? All right, hearing none, it sounds like there were a good amount of us that are in sort of approval mode right now, so I didn't really hear any additional edits or comments. I do look forward to the future where if we do need to decide what those criteria would look like, that we will have a robust discussion on that. So I would like to ask, is there a motion to approve the city's proposal?
Motion to approve allocating funds towards emission reduction studies and scoping evaluations for buildings.
Is there a second?
Second, but not to be pedantic, I think we have to have a figure.
Yes,
Board Member Nelson.
I was going to chime in and say if you can make the motion more specific,
Clear.
and perhaps it can go to the previous slide for some.
Motion to approve the reporting extension.
The 500,000 from the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund.
To expand the new building decarbonization advisory program.
Yeah, is that sufficient, Hannah?
I think that specific language is the language we're looking for in the motion where it says
no
both the
problem.
funding amount and what it's going to, just to be extra clear. I know this is new for us, so.
No problem. So is there a motion to expend $500,000 from the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund to expand the new building decarbonization advisory program?
Yes, there is a motion.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Not a problem. So I will go down the line and I'll ask one by one. On the motion to approve the city proposal as mentioned, how do you vote, Board Member Boyd?
I vote in favor because it's necessary to get to the finish line. It's necessary to get the job done correctly. You're gonna need professionals in there at each stage to make sure the job's getting done, so. Aye.
Thank you, Board Member Boyd. I say aye as well. Board Member Jacobs.
Aye.
Okay, on the motion to propose the city proposal, how do you vote? Board Member Lattimore.
Aye.
How do you vote? Board Member Nelson.
Aye.
And how do you vote? Board Member O'Malley.
Aye.
The ayes have it. The motion passes. Right, thank you. Now we'll be moving on to our third agenda item, which is the update on reporting extension requests. We are going to shift gears to hear an update on the reporting extension requests, and I'll pass it over to Hannah.
And I'm going to pass it quickly over to Aiden, who has that information.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Hannah. Just as a quick reminder, the reporting deadline to report 2023 whole building energy and water data for all BERDO buildings is May 15th. But the review board has delegated us authority to approve up to 2 3-month extensions starting on May 1st. So that process opened up in early May. If approved, a building owner would receive an extension to report their data by August 15th, as opposed to May 15th. But those would only be approved should they meet a certain number of extenuating circumstances. One is that, the utilities, despite, trying to request data in a timely manner, utilities have not been able to provide the necessary data in time. It may also be that they are contracted with a third-party verifier to wrap up their verification reporting. And that verifier is simply not able to complete it in time, and that is really they're dependent upon their timeline. Building owner might be waiting on information from the BERDO team, whether it's a more complicated inquiry or it's possible that our software does have bugs at times. So we're in constant communication about that. But if they have another circumstance, we just ask that they explain that in detail, so we can make determination as to whether or not to approve that. So on the next slide, we just have not too many extension requests come through. It's possible that some might see this as quite a lot, but 146 as of this morning. But I just checked again, and we've had over 100 more come through since those numbers were put together this morning. But as of this morning, just to give you a sense of just the breakdown of the reasons as to why folks are requesting an extension beyond May 15th, about 10% are waiting for our staff to provide them with additional information or enable them to report through the platform. Another handful have engaged that third-party reporter, that third-party verifier, excuse me. And 54 are, and this is mostly what we're seeing, are unable to get utility data from the utilities, that aggregate whole building data in time. And the others range from folks just simply maybe they just enrolled with a new third party, and that third party is just getting caught up with things this week and just simply don't have the time to be able to report in time. We've received inquiries noting that people haven't been able to start reporting due to health related issues and every number of things. So far 111 have been accepted and 35 have been denied, and those that have been denied just have not provided an extenuating circumstance that we would be willing to accept, or just haven't provided enough detail for us to be able to approve those. So we are 2 days away from the final reporting deadline, so we expect these requests to spike over the next 2 days. It's hard to predict exactly the quantity and where it will be in 2 days, but wanted to give a quick update in the meantime. And that's all from me.
All right, thank you, Aidan. I will now turn it over to the board and ask if you have any questions or comments. So first off, we're going to start with Board Member Boyd.
Hi, so with the 35 requests that have been denied, how can I word this? So with them being denied the extension, I don't know, I just would want to know, only question I just want to know, like, what specifically are the reasons? Just so we can have some idea, so because this is new and a lot of people are doing this for the first time, and maybe there's something that they could approach it in a different way so that they're not denied in the future. So if I can, I just would like to know, like, what things that disqualified them.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really what we're seeing more than anything is just people just getting started too late. And excuse me, they're aware of the deadline, for a number of months now. They had reported in previous years. They just didn't get to starting until the last few days. And just given the amount of time that it takes to get data and to report, you really have to give yourself more time for that. So it just doesn't meet the extenuating circumstances that we've outlined. But as we are, denying these extensions, we're just encouraging them to say, look, you're technically out of compliance after the 15th if you haven't submitted, but we just encourage you to submit as soon as possible. And we're sort of reassuring them on the fines to say, well, we're not issuing fines immediately after the 15th. It is still should continue non-compliance occur, we do reserve the right to issue fines at a later date. But we'd be far away from that, given the fact that we would have to send multiple notices ahead of that. So just trying to make sure that people know that, look, you are out of compliance, but we're going to work with you to get you back into compliance as soon as possible.
All right, thank you, Aiden.
Yep.
Thank you, Board Member Boyd. Aiden, can you please remind us approximately how many properties or reporting entities are subjected to BERDO, and what percentage of them are in compliance for this reporting period?
Yeah, so there are about 5,800 or so individual buildings subject to BERDO. Right now, we are looking at just under 30% have submitted. So that's about 1,600 buildings. There are quite a lot of portfolios that are waiting to the last few days. So it's very hard to say exactly where we'll be a few days from now. It's understandable. I used to report to BERDO, on behalf of a number of clients, and a lot of third parties that are reporting, and a lot of other folks just really have this week on their calendars to start BERDO reporting. It's not ideal, but they are working within the short time frame. So it's all hands on deck here, just staffing wise, just try to get as many people across the finish line as we can this week. But yes, right now we're looking about just under 30% reported.
Okay, and thank you for that. One comment, hopefully at the next review board meeting or the one after, depending on what happens in the next few weeks, it'll be great to see a breakdown of compliance according to building types again, even if it, as far as neighborhoods, like one or the other or both, if you have time. I know that's maybe a large request, but I just want to get a sense of how folks are doing across our city, whether it be by sector or by neighborhood specifically. All right, so I don't have any further questions. Thank you for this update. And I will now turn it over to Board Member Jacobs. Do you have any questions or comments?
No, I don't have any questions at the moment. I'm just still following along.
Thank you, Board Member Jacobs. Board Member Lattimore, do you have any questions or comments?
Yes, thank you. I just want to follow up on Board Member Boyd's, I believe, comments about the denial, and just wondered, generally speaking, particularly about the denial, what the composition, meaning type of owner, is it generally a certain type of owner, and or does it for any of these categories, whether it's the 146 or the 35 that were denied, or the 111 that were accepted and 35 that were denied, is there a typology to who's asking for these extensions? Is there a more predominant typology, and the same for the denial category?
Yeah, so for the at least for the denial, so many of those 35 are actually just from the same building owner, going through and putting in the same request for their whole portfolio. So it's
Well, it's a large owner. It's a large owner then. Is that what it
yeah, it is a large owner. So seems to be multifamily. And beyond that, it's just such a small sample size that I can't really speak confidently to any real trends that I'm seeing there. And yeah, so at least on the denial side, I just again, most of that is really just a single owner with a large multifamily portfolio. But on the approval side, it's seems to be across the board. Nothing's really standing out in terms of the types of buildings that are requesting this, and yeah, these are folks that have been proactive with us and have been in consistent email communication with us, and so we make sure that they're fully aware of their options, in terms of just putting in an extension. So beyond that though, I think in a few days time, once we have far more extensions through, I'd love to take a look at that and have a better understanding of that makeup. I just can't speak to it in further detail right now.
Appreciate that, and I'm certainly hoping that 35 denial is not my portfolio, so in case. Because I know that, and so, yeah, I'll follow up separately, but
It is not.
I know that we've been working, at least our property management company has been working with the city on certain things related to our portfolio, but in any case, wondered about, you had mentioned, and you kind of inferred it again just now in your last comment, that earlier on, I think I understood that there were another 100 requests that came in after this 146. So is it now at like 246? Is that what I understand?
Yes, yeah, right now it's at 284, so I think it ticked up even further since I started talking.
Okay.
But that's just this time of the year. You refresh the page a few times and it just keeps, the numbers just keep moving up. So
Deadline looming, they're starting to put the requests in. Okay. Thank you. No other questions.
Thank you, Board Member Lattimore. Board Member Nelson, do you have any questions or comments?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Lattimore. And Board Member O'Malley, do you have any questions or comments?
None, thank you.
All right, and Aiden, I say, best of luck as you get through, well, best of luck to the entire team as you get through all of those extension requests. Good luck. That's all I can say.
thank you.
All right, and just going by my script here, I just want to make sure one last round, if there are any other questions from the board before we move on, I'll pause for a couple of seconds here. Okay, so now we'll be moving on to our fourth agenda item, administrative updates. Now we will cover administrative updates from Diana.
Yes, I can quickly cover some updates. So I just wanted to remind the board, so RDH, our building science consultant, so far you should have gotten a survey from them, and then we did interviews with the RDH team. They have compiled all our responses and have started outlining a training series that they plan to implement starting in June. I shared their findings in our May shared folder. Forewarning, it is like an 8-page document, so there's a lot of information in there. But they do share back all of the responses and the beginnings of a training series for some technical capacity building, and sort of what they're envisioning that will look like. So I just wanted to send a reminder around that as they finish their discovery phase. I also wanted to share, I have not heard from any updates regarding Hassan Faruqi's nomination. We are hoping he should be voted on by the city council soon. So if we hear something, we will let the board know as soon as possible, but we did extend an invite to him to join the technical capacity building series. Should he be interested, because it seemed like a missed opportunity not to include him in the training series. So we did share that invitation as well. I also wanted to provide a quick update because application deadlines are soon approaching. There was a request to sort of review what their recusal process would look like. So if any of the board members feel like they should recuse themselves from any of the applications that come before the board, I checked with council, and they gave the following guidance that said review board member should just say, for the record, I am recusing myself from this application because XYZ. You would then leave the meeting during the discussion and vote of that application. And then I or someone or Ziggy will text you or message you to join again as after the vote has been decided and you were, recused from that vote. So just wanted to send a reminder because we are getting close to application deadlines, and there was a request to kind of review that process. And then lastly,
And on that, Diana, if folks have questions about that, feel free to reach out to Diana as well.
yes. And I should mention, like, Ziggy and I are working quickly to make sure that the applications are shared ahead of time. So you won't be surprised at the day, like in the hearing itself. We'll give notice ahead of time. And then lastly, our next hearing is scheduled technically for May 27th. It is a holiday, Memorial Day weekend will be that day. So we agreed that if we receive no applications by this Friday, that we'll just forgo this meeting. But if we do receive applications by this Friday, we'll be moving that meeting to the following Tuesday, so May 28th. So keep an eye out. Ziggy and I are watching for any applications. If we receive no applications, we will just cancel that meeting. Yes, okay, back to you, Chair, as we kind of did things out of order, so final item.
No problem, no problem. Just wanna make sure, thank you, Diana, for that update first and foremost. Just in case anybody had any questions to Diana, I know we're gonna hold off probably on a question regarding the recusal process for every specific relationship or situation, but I just wanted to check if there were any questions from the board, given what Diana just went over. Okay, hearing none. Our fifth agenda item is approving the previous meeting minutes. Yes, of course, very much out of order. So this is the last thing on our agenda to approve the meeting minutes from April 22nd. Are there any questions or comments regarding the meeting minutes? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Is there a second? Thank you. On the motion to approve the minutes, board members in favor, please say aye or show your hands. Aye.
Aye.
Our board members who would wish to abstain, please say abstained. I think the ayes had it, so I'm board members who oppose say nay, just to go by the script, and the minutes have been approved. Moving on, is there a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
On the motion to adjourn the meeting, board members in favor, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Hearing everyone, the ayes have it. The motion passes. This meeting is adjourned at 6:15 p.m. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.
Safe.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Good night.